For nearly 150 years, Alcatraz has stood as a fortress in the middle of the bay. Initially, it was a base to protect the Golden Gate from potential invaders. Later, as a prison, it confined some of the most notorious criminals of the 20th century. Today, Alcatraz shares with us its severe past amidst a spectacular backdrop. The lure of Alcatraz is so great, it's so rich in history, intrigue, and legend that we keep finding reasons to come back here. And so does Hollywood.
Alcatraz.
Alcatraz.
Right on the bluff here in The Enforcer, Clint Eastwood shot a bazooka and blew up a fake guard tower. Usually inmates were trying to escape from Alcatraz. Here they actually landed on Alcatraz for the movie The Rock.
This is the oldest part of Alcatraz. Did you know it was originally a Civil War fort?
Now Hollywood's fascination with Alcatraz is being reciprocated. There's an exhibit devoted to movies about The Rock called Alcatraz, Escape from Reality.
Robert Stroud, the famed Birdman himself, never kept any birds on Alcatraz.
And part of the history given on public tours is film history.
If you've seen the Star Wars trilogies and you've seen Darth Vader's doors closing in his ship, the Death Star, that's the sound of these doors closing.
Rich Weideman is Chief of Public Affairs for the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, which includes Alcatraz.
You can't not be affected by Alcatraz.
It's Frisco, I tell you, and if it's Frisco, it's The Rock.
From practically the moment it opened as a federal prison in 1934, Alcatraz attracted the attention of movie makers.
I ain't going no federal pen. There isn't one big enough to hold your Prozac.
Edward G. Robinson starred in The Last Gangster in 1937. The very first film about The Rock was earlier that year, called Alcatraz Island.
Alcatraz Island with Ann Sheridan was made on sets in Hollywood. And what the filmmakers did is they shot exteriors of Alcatraz from boats, got as close as they could before the Bureau of Prisons chased them away, and then cut to a scene with prisoners arriving on a dock. And the dock looked remarkably like the Alcatraz dock does today. But the minute the prisoners entered the institution, it was all a Hollywood set that was just basically guessing what the inside of Alcatraz looked like. The security was so tight here, cameras were not allowed anywhere close to or around or inside the island.
You don't talk in here.
More recent films were able to use the real Alcatraz as a set, even employing its 1934 vintage cell door mechanism.
All mechanical, no electricity.
Welcome to Alcatraz.
Altogether, Alcatraz has been the subject of more than 30 films, some obscure, some well-known, such as The Rock, starring Sean Connery and Nicolas Cage.
I want to find some rockets. Don't tempt me.
They built a fake hatch in the floor of the utility corridor right below us here, crawled down inside, and all of a sudden they were in the tunnels that you saw in the movie The Rock. Looked like kind of like the Indiana Jones ride.
The tunnels in The Rock were modeled after real tunnels built on Alcatraz during the Civil War.
Those tunnels, I remember in that movie, were much bigger. They were
much
huge.
larger,
right.
Yes. And the balls of flames coming were added as special effects and all that. As people who work out here watch these films, we can tell the minute they're in Hollywood and the minute they're back on Alcatraz. And sometimes it's a 5-minute sequence and it's just set together so effectively that you think you're on the island the whole time.
There are stories lurking around every corner of Alcatraz. Many have been picked up by Hollywood and embellished.
Well, this may be one of the most famous cells in Alcatraz, on Alcatraz.
Correct.
Don't you think?
And it was a cell that only one man was ever put in. It was a cell that was built specifically for the Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud.
You don't want to be a jailbird all your life, do you?
If you watch the movie The Birdman of Alcatraz, you see Burt Lancaster playing an aging inmate, caring, loving individual, loving nature, wildlife, birds. He was actually a psychopathic killer, violently aggressive to other inmates physically, brilliant, suicidal, uncontrollable, and basically not Burt Lancaster.
Goodbye, Bob.
He entered prison as a 17-year-old man committing murder. He died in prison at the age of 73. 54 years in prison, 44 in isolation, away from any human contact.
Movies help promote the image of Alcatraz as the most horrible prison in the U.S. Murder in the First showed us an area below the main cell block called the dungeon that in the mid-1930s really was used for isolation.
We think they had rings in the back where they actually chained the inmates to the walls.
Chained them to the wall.
Chained them to the walls, and they basically had bread and water down here and a hot meal every few days.
Eat, young! You know the rules. You don't eat, you go to solitary.
And Murder in the First portrayed Henry Young, a prisoner down here, naked, curled up in the corner, having water hosed on him by the officers. The fact that he was down here over a year, part of that was true. That he was fed probably bread and water like the other inmates, and when he got out, he did commit crimes in the institution, but he didn't murder anybody as they implied in the film. The movie poster, Murder in the First, says it's the trial that brought down Alcatraz. The trial was 1938, 1939. Alcatraz closed in 1963. Didn't exactly bring down Alcatraz.
Well, at least not right away.
Rich says the conditions on Alcatraz were actually much better than what the movies often showed.
The movies made while Alcatraz was in operation. They implied Spanish dungeons, they implied inhuman treatment, they implied inmates doing everything humanly possible to escape, when in actuality, very few men attempted escape, only 14 escape attempts in all the years Alcatraz was in operation, and only 5 men missing. Nobody has ever escaped from Alcatraz and lived to tell a story, so they say.
But that doesn't stop us or Hollywood from speculating about 3 of the 5. Frank Morris, and brothers Clarence and John Anglin, whose daring exploits are the basis for the film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood.
Is it true no one's ever bust out of here?
So they tell me.
June 11th, 1962, they slid down a stovepipe at the end of the cell house. They made it down to this edge of the island, both in real life and in the movie Escape from Alcatraz.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night, they made it to the water's edge. We don't know exactly when. They inflated a rubber life raft out of raincoats from the factory at the north end of the island and supposedly sailed away.
No one knows what happened to the 3, but the movie implies they survived the escape. And while films may not always accurately portray Alcatraz, Rich says Hollywood has benefited the island tremendously.
The Park Service feels that the movies continue the mythology of Alcatraz. It created the mythology of Alcatraz, and it helps us restore the island. Anytime a motion picture is made out here, we usually get an area of the island restored and oftentimes open to the public that never would have been open to the public before.
Alcatraz's movie history has been incorporated into some of the tours given to visitors. 2 books have been published, posters are on display, and props have been left behind, all of which only add to the mystique and attraction of Alcatraz.
Welcome to the Rock.